The meter element is another HTML5 web form element that's new, and it's used to represent a value that falls within a known range. So you can think of this as being sort of a gauge, like a thermometer or a tachometer or any other gauge device that would show a value between some minimum value and some maximum value. The meter element should not be used to demonstrate progress against a series of steps, because that's what the progress element is for. And like many other new HTML5 elements, meter and progress have a semantic meaning. So meter means a measurement and progress means progress. So since different browsers might choose to render these in different ways, you shouldn't attach separate meanings to each of these tags other than what they're intended for. So we have more attributes available to us on meter than we do on progress. The first is the value attribute, which is the current value of the control. And that should be greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to the max value. Min represents the minimum value of the element, and max represents the maximum value. So those are pretty self-explanatory. Then we have a couple of other attributes that we can use on gauges. We have a high, low, and optimum value. So think of a gauge that shows, for example, revolutions per minute, like a tachometer in a car. You have a red area, which would indicate values that are considered to be high for the car. And then you have a low area where values would be considered low. And then you have an optimum value, which indicates an optimum value for whatever it is you're measuring. The meter element lets you specify these values. And again, the browser can choose how to render these. So if your measurements that you're displaying to the user happen to have ranges which can be indicated as high or low or optimum, you can choose to put these attributes on the meter element. Then they'll be rendered appropriately in the browser. So let's take a look at how this currently works. I'll switch over to the code. So here I am in the snippets, and here's the meter section. So let's open up the meter start example, and that's here in chapter 4. Okay, so let's go ahead and scroll down. So I'm going to put a meter element in here, and you can imagine that a meter element might be used to show something like how much storage space you've got left on your disk out of the maximum amount. Now, without the meter element, we'd be forced to show something like this, text or some other maybe static graphic. What we're going to do is go to the snippets, and I'm going to copy this and paste it in. So we'll paste, and we'll get rid of the old one. So I pasted in this meter tag right here, and it has a current value of 30 with a min of 0 and a max of 100. And I've also put in low, high, and optimum values. Low is 20, high is 80, and optimum is 40. Now, optimum, by definition, should be defined to be what the optimum value is. And optimum really means whatever you mean it to have. I could make the optimum value below 20, for example, and the browser might choose to render that as saying, well, optimum values are actually pretty low. Or if I made it above the high value, then the browser would indicate on whatever UI element it used to render this that optimum values are usually pretty high, meaning higher is better. So we've got the meter tag. Then inside the meter tag, we have the fallback text. This is what's displayed to the user in the case that the browser does not support the meter element. So in this case, the meter will be ignored, and the user will see this text instead. So let's go ahead and try this in a browser. So right now, Opera is the only browser that supports the meter element. So let's bring this up in a browser that doesn't support this. Let's bring this up in, let's say, Firefox. And you can see that it doesn't render anything, so it just shows you the text. Let's bring it up in, let's say, Chrome. Actually, it looks like the newest version of Chrome now supports this. So you can see that it's rendering a little rectangle with a filled-in area for the value that I've given it. And let's bring it up in Opera, because I know Opera supports this. Open with Opera. And you can see Opera supports it as well. So let's go back to the code and change some of the values. Let's change the value to be, say, 60. And if we did that, then in real life, the fallback text would update as well. So let's save. Let's go back to Firefox. So now let's refresh. You can see the fallback text is now updated. Let's go back to Chrome. Now let's refresh this. You can see that the gauge has now filled in a little bit. And let's bring up Opera as well. And let's refresh Opera so we get the updated value. Okay, so you see that Chrome and Opera are currently only rendering the gauge with the value attribute. They're not yet rendering the low and high and optimum readings just yet. But as these browsers grow in capability, they may choose to do that. Again, it's a semantic tag, so the browser gets to choose how it wants to render this stuff. All right, so that's how you use the meter element, and we've seen now how to use meter to display a measurement between a minimum and maximum value of a known range and specify some optional attributes that indicate low, high, and optimum values.